Welcome back to another lesson in the Sweet Dreams Shawl. Jane, I'm going to hand over to you and you can take it from here.
Great, thank you. So welcome everyone to section number 4, which means we're making excellent progress through the shawl. I'm very happy to see the work that everyone's done. And this week we're going to be doing a chart, and there's no written instruction for this. And I'm going to talk you through the chart, and you can see that it's actually really, really simple to follow. One of the things that I do recommend when working with a chart is having some way that you can mark your rows of what you've done. And you can either use a ruler, but then every time you move your work, you've got to work out where you were. What I did, I'll show you what I use now, but what I used to do was glue my piece of, at least my paper with my chart on, onto a piece of cardboard, and then made a thin sleeve that wrapped around the cardboard, and then I'd move that piece of paper up as I worked so that I could keep following, and it stayed still on my work if I moved about or anything, and I didn't lose the row that I was on. So when you do that, you also then don't need a row counter, which makes it really easy. So what I use now is Knit Pro make a chart holder. So it stands on the table, and the way a chart works is when you put your chart on here, where are my magnets? There they are. I've lost one somewhere. Anyway, so when you put your chart on here with your magnets to hold it in place, the ruler for the chart is also magnetized, which makes it really, really easy to work. And when you work with the chart, the ruler goes above the row you're working on. Okay, the reason for that is if you have the ruler below where you're working, you can't see what you've done. But if it's above where you're working, you can see on your work where you are, as well as on the pattern. So if you're not sure of what pattern, what stitch you need to be doing, you can refer both to the pattern on the chart and to the pattern where you've just knitted as to where you are next, which makes it much easier to follow. Okay, so if we look at the chart, there's a key. And the key shows you what the different blocks and stitches mean. Okay, so the first one, and I just need my pencil, and I didn't fill this one in properly. I think you've got an updated one and I'm working off an old one. So the first one is the SSK. So you've got your first 3 stitches and then the SSK, which is just that line through it. And I've used that symbol before when, if we look at the chart for the lace, I've got that same symbol there. Okay, so we've done the SSK, and the next block is a pink block, and that is for the color. So you knit in color B. So my color B is my purple. So that's what I would use in place of the pink. The yellow is the knit in color C, and the color C is the variegated yarn. The next one is a V with a line on top of it, which means to slip the stitch purlwise. And you can see sometimes the slip stitch purlwise is in your color C, and sometimes it's in your color B, depending on the row you're on and the yarn, color yarn you're working with in that yarn. The next symbol is a cross, and the cross comes in at the end of the row, which is the knit front and back. And we used that same symbol in the lace, if you used the chart for the lace work. And that only comes in at the end of the row. So if we look at this, and I need to just line up where I was so that I can get you all up to date. Okay, so here I've got, if I move this over a bit, there we are. So by working with my ruler above where I'm working, if I compare my knitting to that section, I can see I've done that bit, I've done the next bit with that, with those stitches, I've done that row, so my next row is that. And I think that shows up really easy when you work with the ruler above where you are. And it's very quick and easy to find where you were if things do move. So I do recommend a magnetic board. It does make things very easily. I think in art shops you can get a magnetic board. I'm not sure, but
Jane, there are a couple of other tools. So I don't know if anyone's tried using the app Knit Companion.
yes.
If you use a tablet, then you can put the app on your tablet. And I don't know how the chart part of it works, but I think that it's similar.
If I show you here, I've got Knit Companion, and here's a chart, and I can move this cursor up as I go, and that shows me my rows that I'm working on. This cursor, if I happen to put my work down and I don't know where I am, where those two lines intersect is where I was. So there's so many options with this Knit Companion. If you've got a tablet, I really recommend downloading it and using it.
And it is a free app to download with in-app purchases, I think, for different things.
It is a free download, but it does have limited use unless you upgrade.
Yeah, which is fair enough, because it's a good tool that a lot of money's gone into developing. So
absolutely. Though for me, I find the free version really, really simple. It's also, if I move this a bit, you can see here are my row counters. So as I do a row, I can then tap that and there's my row counter. And right. I can't remember the lady's name who developed that app, but I listened to her on KAL, and it was fascinating, all the options for Knit Companion. So I do really recommend that. And so it's a much easier thing than actually even downloading and printing all your pages, because the whole pattern is downloaded into Knit Companion as a PDF, and you can link your Ravelry account to it as well, which makes it really easy. And I don't get any royalties from Knit Companion.
Neither do I. not yet anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so the mosaic is a really easy stitch and pattern to follow. Even though you're working with two colors, in every row you're only working with one at a time, so that makes it really easy. Also, on your wrong side row, you don't need to be following the chart. You follow the color of the yarn that you were working with in the right side, so it's also pretty easy to follow. So I just want to show you, first of all, to start off with, to keep your threads carried through up in the R cord. You can see here, you can't see any of the threads being carried through because they're tucked into that R cord. So the way I do that is the color that I finished with on my previous row goes underneath the other color. So in this case, it's my B and C. So I was working with my color C. So I take it underneath my color B and I knit my I cord in that color C. So it's the color from the previous row that I knit the I cord. I then swap yarns over, again with color B coming from underneath, and I slip and slip and knit. And then I'm going to be carrying on with my color B. And I can tell from the chart which color I'm working on, because the slipped stitches are in color C. The knit stitches are in color B. So I know that I'm going to need to be using my color B for the next row. So this one is 3 in B, slip 3, 3 in B. So I've got 1, 2, 3. And when I slip purlwise. So I bring the needle in front and I slip. And then I knit 3. And I continue following the pattern in that way. And slip 1, knit 3. And that's all there is to it, really. Because when I come to my wrong side row, what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to follow the chart because it can be tedious, but if I turn it around, I know I'm working in purple in my color B. That's the color that's at the end of the row. So I knit all my color B stitches and slip all the color C stitches. It couldn't be simpler. Are there any questions? So it's really just about getting used to working with a chart, especially if you've never done that before.
So Jane, essentially with this chart, it's telling you 2 things. So one is looking at the color of the box, which is telling you the color of the yarn you're working with. And the other is the symbol inside the box, which is telling you what you've got to do.
Yes.
With the stitch.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is also a garter stitch pattern. So both rows, right and wrong side, are all garter stitch. So there's no purl, it's just knit front and back.
Okay, so that makes it a little easier because you're not thinking about whether you're knitting or purling a stitch on either the right side or the wrong side rows.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So somehow I made a mistake in a previous row.
From everyone's faces, I don't know that they're entirely convinced that this is super simple. But I think it's always one of those things is you have to, you've got to take it away and go and sit down and then actually try and do it yourself and follow the instructions and work through it.
And it really, really is a very simple pattern and a very simple way to start learning working with charts. And the last section, section 6, there is a chart for it, but I've also given written instructions. But having followed this chart, you'll find working with more charts later on much easier as well.
And certainly judging by the work that everyone's done and managed to work through the lace section, it wasn't too intimidating.
No, I don't think so. So well done everyone for having done your lace.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm nearly at the end of the row and I want to show you, once you've got going with the pattern, because it is a lot of repetition, so you get into the motion of what you need to be doing. I just want to show you how you deal with the end of the row without having to check your chart all the time.
So what you're going to talk people through now is how to finish the row with the increase that happens at the end of the row and connect that to the pattern and the chart, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So also just remember when you're slipping your stitch, to slip it purlwise, it makes it easier when you come to knit that stitch at the end. So here I'm carrying on with the pattern, which was knit 3, slip 1, knit 3, slip 1, knit 3, and I've got 4 stitches left. So to complete my pattern, I need to slip the next stitch, but I don't have 3 in color C to slip because I've got my last 3 stitches which need to be worked with. So as always, my last 3 stitches, I carry on with the purple, even though if I were to follow the pattern, it shouldn't be in purple. But as I said earlier, what happens at the end, you get this stripy effect which just matches in with the rest of the pattern anyway. So can you see how it just finishes off really without causing any problems with the color not being quite correct? Am I making myself clear? I think
So Jane, are you saying just ignore the color on the chart for the last 3 stitches on the knit rows?
The chart that I've, thanks Bridget, I've got a thumbs up there. The chart that I've given you does actually go to the end of the row. Okay, and so you can follow it all the way to the end. But if you don't feel like looking at the chart all the time, if you, I'm trying to see where my thing is, here we are. So here you can see, I have taken all the stitches to the end, but you don't want to, but it's on 2 pages because the number of stitches is quite wide. So that you only work with 1 page, you knit your pattern, following the pattern up to 3 stitches before the end of the row. And then your last 3 stitches, you knit with the thread that you're working with, regardless of the color that the pattern actually says, unless you're following the last 3 stitches of the chart. You can see on the chart, I do go all the way to the end.
And Jane, it looks like on the chart you have, you've continued that color. So if you are following the chart is showing you what color to use.
Yes.
And it's not exactly in the pattern. If you were to look at the actual mosaic color work, it's like those 3 little edge stitches kind of fall off the pattern repeat, but you don't have to worry about it because it's all in your I-cord edging.
Yeah, so it gives you a striped effect, you can see there, and you can see on my work here, it gives you a striped effect. But if we look at the I-cord edge, you also get that striped effect as well.
Yeah.
Because every alternate row has worked with a different color.
Yeah.
Okay, so then when I do my next row, my wrong side row, all I'm going to be working with are my purple stitches. I'm going to slip the other color. So slip my first stitch purlwise, take my yarn to the back, knit 1, knit front and back, and the next stitch is still purple, so I knit that. But now when I'm doing my wrong side row, I bring my yarn to the front, slip the next stitch purlwise, take my yarn to the back, and knit my next stitches. If I don't remember to bring my yarn back, I'm going to have the purple being carried across the other stitches, and that's going to destroy my pattern. So remember, when you slip, bring the yarn forward, slip the stitch purlwise, take the yarn to the back to carry on knitting. So I'm going to slip, so I bring my yarn forward, slip the next 3 stitches purlwise, take my yarn back to knit the next 3 stitches. Really simple. Okay, that's all there is to it.
Okay, so it's at the end of today's lesson.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone's got any questions? Now's your chance.
When you start the next row, will you be starting in your other color?
So when I start my next row, the first 3 stitches I'll be knitting with the purple.
Purple, but then you'll swap to the...
Yes. So I'll swap to my variegated and continue with the variegated. Okay. And I'm sure while we're chatting, I'll get there so that I'll be able to show you. So are there any other questions?
Jane, it is slip purlwise, eh? When you slip the stitches.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. Both front and back, right and wrong sides. Always just slip it purlwise.
Okay.
That's
And then,
and you can see as I'm knitting, I'm not needing to check the chart. I'm going according to the colors on my needle, which make it much easier.
Jane, following the colors on your needles only works on the wrong side row, which is the return row.
Yes.
Yes. And on the right side row, you have to follow the chart because that's where the pattern change happens.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can see every 2 rows, the instructions are actually identical.
The same. Yeah.
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 Yeah. The only thing I do recommend is don't get into the habit of working above the ruler. Always work below the ruler. Because that certainly does make things easier. Also, when you're slipping your stitches, don't pull your yarn tight. You can see what happens if I pull it tight. What happens to those stitches? Rather leave it loose so that you keep your tension right.
Yeah, because you don't want to end up puckering the whole mosaic section because you've been yanking the yarn too tight.
Yes, yeah. So it's the same principle as when you were doing the honeycomb.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got to the end of the row and I've got my 3 stitches left. So I'll bring my yarn to the front of my work and slip my 3 stitches for the I cord. And I turn. And the last color I worked with was purple. So my I cord is going to be knitted in the purple, but I need to remember to take it underneath the yarn. Sorry, let me bring it centered. So the purple is underneath my variegated yarn. And I just want to I'm just holding this, my variegated yarn out the way without actually creating any tension on it. I knit my I cord. And now I swap yarns. And I take again underneath. And I do my SSK. Without splitting your stitches, splitting your yarn. And I move my chart up 1. And I can see actually I've got a long row of just knitting in the variegated. So I just follow all the way through, and I can see on my pattern, if I compare my pattern here, can you see my pattern to where I am here? So these 3 stitches are going to be knitted, and are going to be slipped. That color is going to be carried through on those 3 stitches only. I'm knitting all across. So I can see those 3 stitches that I'm slipping are actually those 3. So it's easy to follow when I've got the chart in front of me with the ruler above. I can compare to where I am and see where I need to be knitting the 3 stitches. Or not, sorry, slipping the 3 stitches, carrying them through to the next row. So if I do that, then I'm going to be knitting until I get to those 3 stitches. And there I am at those 3 stitches. I slip them purlwise and carry on knitting. And if I do that now and show you where I am, you can see how that pattern is following through with those stitches being slipped and carried through to the next row. Okay.
Yeah, nice. It does help to look at the knitting in comparison to the chart.
Yes. Yeah, it does. So even if you were to use the Knit Companion app, there as well, I would recommend on the Knit Companion, the cursor is light enough to read underneath, but sometimes, like here with the yellow, it's difficult to see because the chart is in yellow and the line is in yellow. So I would also work with this line being above the row that I'm working on. And there is an option to change the color of your cursor. No, thanks. But I need to play with it to see where that is.
Jane, the
Yeah.
the chart that I've got is across 2 A4 pieces. Have I got the wrong chart?
No, you haven't. It is across 2. I've just been showing you 1. So you can see I've got it on 2. But I was just working with 1 and showing you how to work to the end of the pattern anyway. There's a 14 stitch pattern repeat. So if I move this down, you can see I've got this marked with the pattern repeat going through.
And my other question is, you're not carrying all the colors up in your I-cord, just the
ones I'm working on.
And so one you chopped off.
So when I finished off with the lace and finished off with the grey, I left a tail and I worked the tail in for a little way. And I hadn't carried the variegated through, and you can see here's the end of my tail and of the pink, which I've carried through as well from when I joined them. So those I can just snip off.
Because I've carried my lace color up, so then I need to just chop it off.
You can carry it all the way through, but it just becomes bulky when you're working with all the colors on the end of your needle.
Yeah.
So also so when I finished with, because I'd added the pink, I finished that off and left the tail. And if you look carefully in there, you can see it's inside my I-cord. And I've chopped it off. And then when I rejoined the pink, it's not showing through on this one, but I carried it up for a little way. And when I joined the purple, I carried that up for a little way as well. And then I also cut it off and left it so that I'm only working with 2 colors. And then I don't end up with such a tangle at the beginning of the row.
Jane, I found I put stitch markers in where the dotted line is so that the sections are divided off. And I found that made it much easier to sort of keep control of what was going on.
Yeah, so that's the same as when you were doing the lace. Every pattern repeat, to put in a stitch marker, you can do exactly the same here. Every pattern repeat, put in a stitch marker.
Yeah.
It also helps when you're working to follow. You can see exactly where your pattern repeats are happening.
Thanks, Jane, for another really helpful tutorial. We look forward to seeing all of your progress next week.